If you added up all the times you failed, all the times you came up short, would you try again? What if failure wasn't a limitation? What if taking risks was your status quo? What kind of world would you imagine? When global challenges seem overwhelming, we need to create unlikely partnerships, experiment with new thinking, and set audacious goals. To build a better world, to make a real difference, we have to take bigger risks, make bigger bets. And if we fail and fail again, we have to get right back up, stronger than we were before. To live in a world worth living in, we have to challenge, inspire us. We have to take risks, be bold, and let urgency conquer fear. We have to be fearless.
How's everybody doing? Any fearless feds in the house? Why don't you stand up? You've been sitting and listening to speakers for a while. Any fearless feds in the house, stand up. Any risk takers? Any disruptors? Any innovators? Maybe this is the bloated bureaucrats. Maybe this is the paper pushers. I said, is anyone fearless in the house? All right. Have a seat, have a seat. Or stay standing, whatever makes you comfortable. You know, it's an honor to be here. I feel like I'm with my people, with folks that are passionate about service, about giving back to their country. It's also always good to be on a stage that Catherine Archuleta has been on. She's smart, she's brilliant, she's creative. She's also the person that decides when we get our snow days, so we should be very, very kind to her. She's like the federal superintendent for about 5 months of the year. So it's really an honor to be here today. You know, you're probably asking why I opened with that video and what it has to do with easy passes and HOV lanes, which is the topic of my talk. The first one, I'll be honest, you all have probably all been there. We were sitting in a room trying to come up with a creative title for this talk. There were about 3 of us. Like, what can we call this talk? And we couldn't come up with anything. And then someone said, well, you're going to talk about collaboration. What about like HOV and Easy Pass? Or, oh, that's great. No Easy Pass in the HOV lane. And so I'm going to tell you, while we thought it was a brilliant idea at the time, it probably doesn't have a whole lot to do with the talk that I'm going to give today. And so there's a lesson there. Like, 1, don't get high on your own supply when you're sitting in a room like that. And two, make sure you do the remarks before you do the title of the speech. The other reason that I played that video today is because I was asked to talk a little bit about why I left this comfortable foundation job, working for billionaires, getting all those things that Catherine talked about, espressos and bicycles and such, to come work for the federal government. And when I really thought about it, it was all about that video. It was all about the opportunity to be fearless. It was all about making big bets. It was all about urgency. It was all about the challenges that our communities are facing, and I wanted to get in and I wanted to do something about it. You know, one of the things I learned, whether it was working for billionaires at the Case Foundation or working for a Boys and Girls Club at the beginning of my career, is that the challenges that face our community, the scale and the scope is so great, no sector, no individual can go it alone. If we are going to have the successes and the transformation that we need to have, it's going to take everyone being on board and rowing that boat together. Some of you may have heard the Children's Defense Fund slogan that, quote, "Dear Lord, be good to me. The sea is so wide and my boat is so small." Have you heard that? When you look at some of the challenges that our community is facing, if we're going to navigate those treacherous seas, it's going to take business, it's going to take government, it's going to take the nonprofit sector, and no longer will it be good for us all to just sit there by ourselves. And so I've learned a few things about what it all comes together and the strengths that we each bring. So in government, you know, it might be less agile than business and philanthropy, but it's unmatched in the reach for potential and scale. The nonprofit sector brings credibility, a deep knowledge of the issues and the communities. Philanthropy contributes risk capital. They can create pilots that we can then take to scale in the federal government. And the private sector has this great sense of urgency, and they act quickly, and they have market forces that keeps us moving. And so the next gen leader of tomorrow will blend it all. And what's exciting, especially for the millennial sets that we've heard, is they no longer look at doing good as being in the sole domain of nonprofits or the sole domain of governments. They say government can do it, nonprofits can do it, but so can philanthropy, so can business. And they want to use all of these tools jumping in and out. And that's what I'm excited about, and I think that's what's going to yield stronger change in the future. And so I think about this video, and I ask myself, why are we here today? This is why we're here. These are the challenges that our communities are facing. 15% of Americans that are in poverty. 16 million children in poverty. And we say those words in Washington and we throw them around and we get used to it. 16 million children in DC that might not have air conditioning on a day like today. That when the school closes, don't know where they're going to get food from. U.S. high school dropouts. We're still struggling even though we're seeing some growth in the work that we've had. DC's HIV/AIDS rate right here in our nation's capital is higher than 5 PEPFAR nations. And gun violence deaths in the United States of America, the greatest country on earth, more than 35,000 a year. And one of the things that I have the opportunity to work on in addition to the Social Innovation Fund is the President's My Brother's Keeper initiative. And one of the stats that shocks us and really motivates our work is that black boys in the United States are 6 times more likely to be victims of murders than white boys. And they're half of the nation's murder victims. So when we think about why we formed this government, to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty, we're still facing these huge challenges. We shouldn't beat ourselves up too much. We have this wonderful democracy for a couple hundred years. We've cured some diseases, invented the internet, have provided a safety net for many people. But I think when we think about why we're all in this room, why we all work as hard as we work, why we do the clearance processes, why we work late at night, why we deal with the challenges, it's because we all want to tackle the challenges that we see on the board. But yet, the way so many of us keep doing our work is this. Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And far too many of us, whether we're sitting in government offices, foundation offices, or nonprofit offices, we pat ourselves on the back with the small progress that we're making, with how many kids went through our doors, with how many boxes we checked, instead of the impact that we're making. So for those of us that are sitting in this room today that took time out of your days, out of your year to come here, I think we want to disrupt the status quo. And so I want to leave you with 5 strategies of what it takes to be a fearless change maker. When I was at the Case Foundation, we actually developed this idea of being fearless. We took a landscape assessment of some of the most successful social movements of our time and what folks were doing today that were incredibly successful. And we found 5 characteristics of fearless change makers, and I want to leave you with those today to think about in your work. So 1, they make big bets. 2, they experiment early and often. 3, they make failure matter. 4, they reach beyond their bubble. And 5, they let urgency conquer fear. So first is this idea of making big bets. No one wants to be called... Oh, you want me to go back? I'll come back to those. Take a picture. Here, let me move out of the way. So, 1, there's this idea. I'll come back to it, I swear, I promise. You guys are all so good taking notes. I love it. So, 1 is this idea of making big bets. We do not have time in America today to be called to the incremental. People no longer want to make gradual change. If you are a mom and you're balancing 3 babies and a job, you don't want someone to come out and call you out of your time to do something that's not going to lead to great impact. People want those John F. Kennedy moments. They want those moonshot moments. They want those big, hairy, audacious goals where they are called to something that's greater to themselves. That's what people want to work on, and that's what fearless change makers, whether they're in government, business, or nonprofit, call people to action around. One, I love this idea. Anyone ever heard of Malaria No More? Malaria No More is a nonprofit organization that came out of a board meeting one day and didn't say that we're going to distribute bed nets. They said we're going to eradicate malaria in sub-Saharan Africa by 2016. Could you imagine those discussions? The lawyers, some lawyers in this room, can you really say that? What if we don't get there? They said we need to have this goal. We need to have this to reach to in order for people to come up with us. And they're making incredible strides towards that goal. Anyone know Darrell Hammond at Kaboom, the organization Kaboom that builds playgrounds, working on the obesity epidemic? Darrell Hammond's goal is to make sure that every child in America has a playground within walking distance from themselves. Jeff Bezos at Amazon talked about having a book, every book written in every language within 60 seconds or less. That was many years ago. So think about the work that you're doing. Do you have a big bet? What can you call your people to action to in the work that you do every day? Second is this idea of experimenting early and often. We get so stagnant in the paralysis of analysis, as Jesse Jackson likes to say. And it's a problem of the government. When we create a system, if this is the highway, we are not building a branch off of it. So you have to ask yourself, how can you create these opportunities for experimentation every day? How can you do the types of experimentation that can lead to something great? We have DARPA in the federal government. DARPA created the internet and so many great things that the private sector took on and commercialized and has done incredible work with. But in the rest of our agencies, somehow we're not given the space or the room to experiment. I'll be honest with you, when I joined the government, one of the first things I noticed was every time I had a new idea, people looked at me with skew, like, we can't do that. We've been doing this the same way for about 15 years. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we giving ourselves the room to experiment? Are we giving our peers the room to experiment? If you're federal grant making, are you giving your grantees room to experiment? Paula Kerger, the CEO of PBS, tells a great story about how they stayed ahead of the curve. PBS, old, storied brands. Have any of you seen some of their new digital stuff? Have you seen their Mr. Rogers video? Or their Bob Ross the Painter video? If you want a good cry, go take a look at these things. They mix them with music. It's amazing. They're now one of the leading destinations for children online. And she said the way they were able to keep ahead is they actually took a team and separated it. And that team's job was just to make stuff up, to throw pasta on the wall and see what sticks. They didn't have to go to staff meetings. They didn't have to go to the 5-year strategic planning meeting. Their job was just to be a skunk works and make things happen. And that's how they stayed ahead of the game. So think about how you can create that in your life. The third thing that they do, fearless change makers, is they make failure matter. This is a tough one, right? We are so good in Washington, and I'll say we're good at this in philanthropy, of sweeping failures under the rug. We like to act like it doesn't happen. But we all know from our own lives that failure teaches, that we learn from it. That when we fall down and scratch our knee, it makes us stronger and not doing that same thing over and over again. You look at the people on this slide. Oprah Winfrey, who was fired from her first job as a reporter because they said she was too emotional. She could have gone away and decided to be a factory worker, but she kept going, and I think she's doing okay. J.K. Rowling, so many doors got slammed in her face about that silly story about a boy wizard. And she kept pushing. She kept moving through the failures in order to make it great. Hillary Clinton, let's talk about the politicians. Her husband, President Obama, who lost elections and kept going. Bill Gates, when he found out that their strategy to end polio didn't work, he said, what's next? How do we make it better? So how can we make sure that we're failing forward, that we're learning from failures, that we're declaring failures, that you're getting your teams to fail quickly and build on top of them instead of sweeping them under the rug? It's so interesting in Silicon Valley. Any Silicon Valley folks from here? Anyone spend much time out in the Bay Area? If you talk to entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley about failures, they wear them like badges of honor. They will tell you about all the companies that they started and failed, but you know what? This one is going to win. And if you look at the failure rate in Silicon Valley, if failure means liquidating assets, failure rate for startups is 30 to 40%. If you actually look at the failure rate and define it as not meeting investor expectations, it goes to 90%. But they all believe we're going to have the next Facebook, we're going to have the next Google, and we're going to learn and we're going to build from those failures. I actually want to show a quick video so you can hear what Steve Jobs had to say on this subject.
No, I've actually always found something to be very true, which is most people don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody that didn't want to help me if I asked them for help. I always call them up. I called up, this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old, and he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book. And he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn, with people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
You've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn, or you won't get very far. So the next thing that fearless changemakers do is they reach beyond their bubble, realizing that innovation happens at the intersections. And this isn't thinking outside of the box. This is the idea of making sure that all oars are in and that we're all working together for our best. This defines the president's agenda on everything from My Brother's Keeper to Connect Ed to Startup America partnership. This is the idea of looking around the table and saying, does everyone look like me? Are there resources that we need that we don't have? And making sure that we're bringing them together. And I'll tell you, it's not easy. You guys have all heard this African proverb. And this is where I'll uncomfortably put in the name of the title the same way they do in a movie. There's no easy pass in the HOV. That didn't work. It's okay. So it's not easy. You guys have heard this African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We know that in our work. I tell you, managing partnerships, you get to the end of the day and you're like, if they call me one more time, oh, their logo's not here. Oh, someone else has to sign this. But we all know when we work through the partnerships, we're better when we're together. The last thing that fearless changemakers do is they let urgency conquer fear. It's this idea that our problems are so great, that our communities deserve better, that we don't have time to wait. I think about a program that we started at the Corporation for National and Community Service called Justice AmeriCorps a couple weeks ago with the Department of Justice. We saw all the undocumented minors that were coming through, that were sitting in facilities and going through the court systems by themselves. We weren't going to wait for Congress to get it together. We weren't going to wait to get the language just right. We partnered with the Department of Justice to find lawyers who would become AmeriCorps members who would help these undocumented young children get through the system. That's about letting urgency conquer fear. It's about moving. It's about believing in what Dr. King said. This idea that tomorrow is today, that there is such a thing as being too late, and there has to be this fierce urgency of now that animates our actions and our deeds. Kaya Henderson, the Chancellor of DC Public Schools, talked about why she keeps her children in DC schools. She said it's not political. She said, the reason why I do it is so when I sit in a meeting and someone says, well, Chancellor Henderson, it's going to take about 7 years for us to get that solution into place. She thinks about her children. 7 years, my children can't wait for it. Their friends can't wait for it. We have to have urgency that pushes us and moves us to make a difference today. And that's what we're trying to do with the Social Innovation Fund. It was created in 2009 by the president to really make sure that we were supporting and not supplanting innovative solutions created by communities around the country, and also to make sure that we were investing in success and evidence. In the government, in foundations, we spend too much time investing in isolated stories of success or how many people were served instead of the impacts on their lives. So we're investing in evidence, and we're trying to scale those solutions that work. I'm low on time, so I'm gonna come to a close. I would encourage you to think about those 5 principles, about making big bets to make history, to experiment early and often, to make failure matter, to reach beyond your bubble, to let urgency conquer fear. But while you're going through that urgency, I want you to think about this quote on the screen that really helps me to think about the work that I do. You've got to have urgency, but you've also got to realize that the work that we're doing is cathedral building. Anyone know that concept of cathedral building? There's a great story that I'll close with that animates it, and it goes back to when the Cathedral of Notre Dame was being built. It took sometimes scores, maybe hundreds of years for these massive structures to be built. And there was someone that was journeying through the land where Notre Dame was being built, and he came across a group of folks that were chipping away at stone. And he said, "What are you doing?" And one of the guys said, "Well, obviously we're stone cutters. We're making stone blocks here." And then he came across someone else that was working with glass and shaping it and dyeing it. And he said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're stained glass makers. We're going to make windows." And so then he came across a woman who was working with a group of children, sweeping up things, handing out food to all the people that were working hard. And he said to the woman, "What are you doing?" She looked up at the structure that was being built around her, and she said, "Me, I am building a temple for the greater glory of God that will last for all times." And so when you think about the work that you're doing, when you think about the clients that you're serving, the children that grant is going to help, have urgency to move today, but recognize you may not sit in the shade of the tree that you're planting. And that we have to be fearless, we have to be cathedral builders, and we have to be urgent if we're going to make a real difference in this nation today. So thank you for all the work you do, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to be with you today.